Welcome to the new video of Neurophilos. Get ready to dive into a gripping tale that will leave you breathless, thinking, and inspired. Whether you're here for the mystery, the drama, or the unexpected twists, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. Let's begin.
When the life you built suddenly falls apart. Do you ever feel as though everything you once depended on, your routines, your identity, the roles that kept you grounded, has quietly collapsed beneath your feet? You still get out of bed, you still speak to people, you still put on the face that the world expects from you. You may even smile, work, and pretend that everything is under control. Yet inside, there is a stark and undeniable truth: nothing feels stable anymore. What once felt solid now feels like dust slipping through your fingers. It is as if the entire structure of your life, everything you believed made you you, has crumbled. And the most terrifying part is not the collapse itself, but the panic that rises afterwards. Where do I begin? How do I rebuild? Is there even a way to start again? If these questions echo inside you, then this chapter is not just information. It is a hand extended in the darkness. Not because it offers comforting illusions or quick solutions, because it won't, but because it offers something far more important: the truth. A brutal, liberating truth that most people spend their whole lives avoiding. The collapse of your life might be the greatest turning point you will ever experience. This isn't poetic optimism. It's psychological reality. And no one understood this better than Gustav Jung. Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, went through a personal collapse so severe that it changed the direction of his entire life. After breaking ties with his mentor, Sigmund Freud, Jung lost almost everything that gave him a sense of identity. He lost his professional network, his reputation, his intellectual home, even his sense of purpose. His entire world, internal and external, fell apart at once. He entered a psychological chaos so deep that he questioned whether he was going insane. Yet it was inside that abyss where he discovered something that stability could never have revealed. In the ruins of his old identity, Jung found the first glimpse of his true self. He would later call this painful period the death of the ego. And as you read this, perhaps that is exactly what is happening to you. The pain you feel right now, the emptiness, the confusion, the sense that everything familiar has been ripped away, is not simply suffering. It is a signal. A call from your psyche to stop living for expectations, roles, and masks. A call to stop holding yourself together with borrowed identities and outdated definitions. What is dying right now is not you. What is dying is the false version of you. The version built to please others. To be accepted. To be predictable. To fit into a structure that was never meant to hold your truth. The collapse you are experiencing is not a punishment. It is a shedding. A tearing away of everything that was never truly yours. Jung realized something extraordinary. Collapse is not a failure of the system, it is a function of it. A psychological mechanism that clears away what no longer serves your evolution. He observed, again and again, that the people who transformed the most, who discovered meaning, freedom, authenticity, were the ones who had first been broken open. Not gently, not comfortably, but forcefully. Those who finally confronted their internal ruins were the ones who rebuilt themselves from the ground up. Pain did for them what comfort never could. It stripped away illusion. And perhaps that is exactly what is happening in your life now. This chapter serves one purpose: to show you that your collapse has meaning. That your emptiness has a direction. That your breakdown may be the beginning of your real life, not the end. You will see why the destruction of your old identity is not a tragedy but a purification. You will understand why falling to the bottom is often the first step toward discovering a truth that books, advice, or theories cannot give you. A truth that emerges only when everything false has been burned away. This journey you are entering, the one that feels frightening, disorienting, uncertain, is not a descent into nothingness. It is a descent into the deepest part of yourself. A place you were never able to reach while you were busy performing a version of life that didn't belong to you. You may be standing in the rubble right now, but rubble is not the end. It is the beginning of rebuilding. Rebuilding not who you were, but who you truly are. Because perhaps, for the first time, you can finally start becoming real. The death of the ego, why everything is falling apart. Most people believe that suffering is a mistake, something to fix, escape, or silence as quickly as possible. Pain is seen as a detour, an interruption to the real life we are supposed to be living. But Carl Gustav Jung saw suffering differently. He viewed psychological collapse as a necessary rite of passage, something ancient and archetypal, a universal experience that every individual must eventually face if they wish to stop being a persona and become a whole human being. This collapse is not random. It is not a mere rough patch or temporary dip. Jung called it the death of the ego, and it marks the moment when everything false, borrowed, or externally constructed begins to crumble. You are not just losing a job, a relationship, or a role, you are losing the illusion of who you thought you were. This is why it hurts so deeply. This is why it feels like the world is ending. Because psychologically, something is ending. Your old identity is dying. The ego, the part of you built from expectations, comparisons, roles, and survival strategies, was never designed to last forever. It was built to help you function in society, not to help you discover who you truly are. And when life demands authenticity, the ego must fall apart. Suddenly, the things that once held you together stop working. The coping mechanisms, the stories you told yourself, the image you presented to the world, none of it can bear the weight anymore. You try to hold on. You try to force normalcy. You try to pretend that this is just a bad phase. But at some point, something breaks. The mask that served you for years begins to crack, and everything you've hidden, fear, anger, grief, emptiness, rises to the surface. You cannot control it. You cannot silence it. This is the moment Jung referred to when he said, "What you resist not only persists, it grows." And this moment, as painful as it is the true beginning of transformation. Because collapse is not the end of the road, it is the beginning of a deeper one. The path toward the self. To reach this path, the ego first must die. Not physically, but psychologically. Symbolically. The ego that always wanted approval. The ego that feared rejection. The ego that lived for success, image, status, or validation. The ego that shaped itself to be acceptable. This version of you cannot survive the journey toward authenticity. As the ego dissolves, grief emerges, because you are not just losing external things, you are losing what you believed was you. And yet, this loss is a liberation. The death of the ego creates emptiness, and emptiness creates space. Space for the self to emerge. The self is not a role or a mask. It is your deepest nature, the part of you untouched by expectations, fears, and social conditioning. But before the self can rise, you must pass through the psychological underworld. Jung compared this inner journey to ancient initiation rituals found in tribal societies. In those cultures, the youth were symbolically killed, stripped of their old identity, and pushed into the darkness. Only after facing fear, uncertainty, and the unknown could they return, reborn as adults, transformed, awakened. Today we no longer have such rituals. But the unconscious still demands passage. And when we ignore this call, collapse arrives forcefully. You might feel lost, trapped between the person you used to be and the person you are becoming. You may feel uprooted from your own life. But what feels like devastation is actually psychological clearing. It is the unconscious stripping away everything false so that something real can finally emerge. If you're still here, reading, listening, feeling, then something in you is alive. Something in you is seeking truth, not comfort. Something in you already knows you cannot go back to who you were. Because the collapse is not a crisis. It is an initiation. A crossing. And no one crosses without facing what lives in their shadows. The shadow is everything you don't want to see about yourself, your fears, resentments, wounds, insecurities, and unexpressed truths. It is the storage room of everything the ego rejected. And as your old identity collapses, the shadow rises. This is the next phase. In Chapter 3, we will enter the most transformative part of the journey, the confrontation with the unconscious. You will understand why the inner chaos you feel is not madness, but communication. Why the darkness you fear is not an enemy, but a guide. And why facing your inner world is the doorway to becoming whole. But for now, remember this. Your collapse is not a failure. It is a psychological rebirth. The ego is dying so the self can live. Entering the inner underworld, the confrontation with the unconscious. When Carl Gustav Jung's external world collapsed, a second collapse began inside him, far more terrifying, far more profound. Losing Freud had stripped him of identity, direction, and belonging, but what followed was not simply grief or confusion. Jung began to experience a descent into a psychological landscape he had never encountered so directly. Visions, symbols, dreams, and archetypal figures rose from the depths of his mind with an intensity he could not control. Most people, when their inner world begins to unravel, try to run. They distract themselves, numb themselves, chase noise, chase productivity, chase anything that keeps them from hearing the silence inside. But Jung did something almost unimaginable. He walked toward the chaos. He faced the collapse head-on. Every day, he withdrew from the external world into quiet contemplation. He filled journals with drawings, dialogues, visions, and symbols. He sketched strange figures. He painted mandalas. He recorded encounters with inner characters, some wise, some frightening, some confusing, all deeply meaningful. This was the birth of something he later called active imagination, a method of engaging directly with the unconscious. Most people believe the unconscious is a mysterious black box that occasionally produces dreams or impulses. Jung discovered that it is a living world, a vast, symbolic landscape containing everything we have forgotten, repressed, avoided, or denied. And when collapse happens, that world begins to speak. Jung's Red Book, which he kept hidden for decades, is the journal of this confrontation. In it he describes meeting symbolic figures. The wise old man, representing inner knowledge. The child, symbolizing rebirth and possibility. The trickster, exposing self-deception. The hero, revealing courage and struggle. The shadow, containing our rejected traits, wounds, and fears. These were not hallucinations. They were psychological realities, personifications of inner forces that had been ignored for too long. The unconscious was reorganizing itself, revealing what Jung called the lost parts of the psyche. And this is where your journey begins. If your life has collapsed externally, something has been activated internally. You may feel waves of emotions you cannot explain. Memories you thought you buried might resurface. Dreams may become vivid or disturbing. There might be a strange sense that something inside you is trying to communicate. This is not failure. This is not mental weakness. This is the unconscious rising. Jung believed that collapse tears down the outer layers of identity so that the inner world, the real, forgotten, unfiltered you, can finally be seen. The feelings that overwhelm you now may not be random. They may be messages from the psyche, asking for acknowledgement. Your inner child may be telling you about wounds you have ignored. Your shadow may be revealing patterns you have denied. Your intuition may be pointing to truths you feared to accept. Your dreams may be showing symbols you need to understand. This confrontation is not painless. It is raw, vulnerable, often frightening. It is a psychological underworld, what Jung compared to the mythic journeys of heroes descending into caves, labyrinths, or night-dark forests. It is the same pattern repeated across cultures. Orpheus descending into Hades. Dante walking into the Inferno. The shaman entering the dream world. The hero facing the dragon. In all stories, the descent is necessary. You cannot skip it. You cannot bypass it with positive thinking or motivational slogans. The unconscious demands recognition. This is the phase where everything you avoided begins to surface. Old traumas rise. Old anger resurfaces. Old fears regain their voice. Old emotional debts return to be paid. But here is the truth Jung discovered. These inner forces are not your enemies, they are parts of you waiting to be integrated. As long as they remain in the shadows, they sabotage your life from beneath the surface. But once you face them, they begin to lose their power. You reclaim the energy that has been trapped for years in repression, denial, and silence. What once felt chaotic now becomes meaningful. What once felt frightening now becomes transformative. This process, however, is not fast. It is not controlled. It cannot be forced. Jung spent years in this confrontation. You may spend months, or longer. But during this journey, something extraordinary happens. You begin to recognize yourself, not the version shaped by society, but the version shaped by truth. You begin to see your patterns clearly. You begin to understand why your relationships failed. You begin to recognize the role you played in your own suffering. You begin to see where you abandoned yourself. You begin to see what you truly want, not what others told you to want. This is the beginning of the most important psychological movement of your life. The movement toward wholeness. Your descent is not madness, it is meaning. Your chaos is not emptiness, it is communication. Your collapse is not punishment, it is awakening. But a question emerges. How do you navigate this underworld without getting lost? Jung left a map, a path found in myth, psychology, and every spiritual tradition. A three-stage process that guides the psyche from collapse to reconstruction. And that is where we go next. The map through the darkness, descent, shadow, and rebirth. Not everyone who collapses becomes stronger. Not everyone who breaks becomes whole. Some people fall and never rise again. Others rebuild the same life on top of the same broken foundations, repeating the same cycles with new faces and new settings. Collapse alone does not guarantee transformation. But Jung understood that collapse can be the beginning of profound psychological rebirth, if you take the right path. He believed that the journey has a structure, an ancient pattern found in mythology, religion, and the unconscious psyche itself. A pattern that appears whenever a human being is forced to confront the deeper layers of their own mind. This pattern unfolds in 3 stages. The descent. The confrontation with the shadow. The re-emergence of the authentic self. This is not an intellectual theory. It is an internal process that you live. And if you are reading this while your life is collapsing, you may already be in the first stage. Stage 1, the descent, entering the inner cave. The descent begins the moment you stop resisting the collapse. At first, you try to escape. You distract yourself. You deny the pain. You tell yourself that things will go back to normal. But eventually, something gives way. Your defenses crack. Your illusions dissolve. And you find yourself sinking into a psychological darkness you can no longer avoid. This descent is not passive, it is necessary. It is the moment when your mind stops clinging to the old story and allows itself to fall into the truth. In this stage, silence becomes a teacher. Isolation becomes a mirror. The world outside feels distant, unreal, almost irrelevant. For the first time, you begin to see the rubble clearly. Every broken dream, every failed identity, every abandoned hope lies in front of you. And instead of rushing to rebuild, you sit with it. You feel the grief. You feel the anger. You feel the emptiness that comes when everything familiar is stripped away. The descent is uncomfortable, frightening, lonely. But it is also honest. And honesty is the doorway to healing. In this inner cave, this space of nothingness, something begins to stir. The unconscious starts to speak. Stage 2, the confrontation, meeting your shadow. When the unconscious awakens, it does not always arrive gently. It brings everything you've rejected, avoided, or suppressed, your wounds, insecurities, failures, fears, desires, regrets. Jung called this collection of discarded truths the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is forgotten. It contains the anger you swallowed, the grief you buried, the boundaries you never set, the desires you never admitted, the pain you never acknowledged, the parts of yourself you tried to hide. During collapse, these parts rise because the ego, the mask, is no longer strong enough to suppress them. You begin to realize that many of your past choices were not conscious. They were shadow-driven. You may even see how you contributed to your own suffering, not out of stupidity, but out of unconsciousness. This realization is painful, but liberating. Because when you see the shadow, it stops controlling you from behind the scenes. Patterns that repeated for years suddenly make sense. Relationships you attracted suddenly reveal their roots. The self-sabotage you couldn't explain becomes clear. You begin to take ownership, not blame, but ownership. You begin to understand yourself, not judge, but understand. You begin to accept the parts of you that were rejected, not fear them, but integrate them. This confrontation is the heart of transformation. It is the fire that burns away the false self. Stage 3, the re-emergence, becoming the real you. After the descent and the shadow work comes a moment so subtle you may not even notice it at first. A shift. A clearing. A small spark of clarity, or calm, or inner coherence. It feels as if something inside you has reorganized itself. This is the beginning of re-emergence. You do not return to your old identity, because that identity has died. Instead, a new center begins to form inside you. Jung called this center the self. It is quieter than the ego, but infinitely more truthful. It does not seek validation. It does not live for applause. It does not cling to old stories. The self guides you from within, not from external expectations. Your choices become different. Your boundaries become firmer. Your relationships become more honest. Your priorities become clearer. Your life becomes simpler, quieter, more meaningful. Reconstruction is slow, deliberate, handcrafted. You are not rebuilding an old house, you are building a new one from the things that truly matter. And every decision becomes a declaration. I will no longer be who others expect me to be. I will be who I was born to be. Of course, the journey is not linear. You may descend again, rise again, get lost again. But now you have awareness, and awareness changes everything. Awareness turns suffering into evolution, pain into wisdom, chaos into meaning. And it leads to a deeper question, one that forms the heart of the next chapter. What if everything you lost was never really yours to begin with? The rebirth of the self. When everything is lost, everything becomes possible. Now that everything has collapsed, a deeper question emerges, one most people spend their lives avoiding. What if the things you lost were never truly yours? What if the job that vanished was a role you outgrew? What if the relationship that ended was a cage disguised as comfort? What if the identity you clung to was a mask that kept you small? What if the collapse was not a tragedy, but a liberation? When you lose the structures that once defined you, your reputation, your ambitions, your relationships, you stand face to face with something most people never encounter, real freedom. Not the glamorous freedom of movies or motivational speeches, but the raw, frightening freedom of no longer having anything to hide behind. Carl Jung warned us about this stage. He said that when the ego collapses, the invisible prison walls fall with it. The life you thought was you often turns out to be a collection of silent agreements, agreements with family expectations, with cultural norms, with survival instincts, with outdated dreams. When those structures fall apart, what remains is not emptiness. What remains is open space, untouched, unclaimed, infinite. But this freedom is not comfortable. It comes with no guarantees. It comes with no map. And it forces the most terrifying question a human can face. Who do I choose to be now? Most people never answer this question. Instead, they rush to rebuild the same life on new scaffolding. They recreate the same dynamics with different faces. They rebuild the same identity using fresh labels. They run back to the comfort of the familiar, even if the familiar has always hurt them. But Jung teaches that this is a trap. Because collapse comes for a reason. It is a correction, not a mistake. What fell apart was not meant to survive your evolution. It was not aligned with your truth. It was not capable of carrying the weight of who you are becoming. The ruins are not punishment. The ruins are release. They are the removal of the layers that kept you captive. The destruction of roles that suffocated you. The end of identities that were built to please others, not honor you. The loss of everything that blocked the emergence of your true self. When the dust settles, you begin to see something remarkable. You are still here. Stripped, shaken, wounded, but here. And what remains is real. You begin to feel a subtle shift inside you. It may come as a whisper, a faint intuition, a quiet clarity. You realize that you don't want to rebuild the old life. Something deeper calls you forward. You begin to want different things. You begin to tolerate less. You begin to crave authenticity, even if it costs you comfort. You begin to value peace more than approval. You begin to say no with less guilt. You begin to take responsibility without self-blame. You begin to walk away from what drains you. You begin to feel the first breath of your real self rising. And this rising is not sudden or dramatic. It is slow, steady, organic. It happens through small decisions. Through honest conversations. Through boundaries you never had before. Through choosing yourself even when it feels unfamiliar. This is the reconstruction phase. Not the rebuilding of the old, but the birth of the new. You begin creating a life that is not a performance. A life that is not a reaction. A life that is not shaped by fear or survival, but by truth. This, Jung believed, is the essence of individuation, the process of becoming who you were always meant to be. But this journey requires courage. Because freedom has a price, responsibility. No one else can decide for you now. No external structure dictates who you must be. Your life becomes a blank canvas, and you are the painter. This is terrifying, but it is also sacred. Because for the first time, the story is yours. The voice is yours. The choices are yours. The truth is yours. And the person who is emerging, slowly, quietly, powerfully, is real. Not perfect. Not polished. Not performative. But whole. If you are reading these words while standing in the ruins of your old life, hear this clearly. You are not broken. You are being reborn. Let the past fall. Let the old identity rest in peace. Let the collapse cleanse what needed to end. And now, take a breath and say, even if softly, I am starting over. Because this is not the end of your story. This is the beginning of the one you were meant to write.